My riding story actually starts before I was born, as I was fortunate enough to grow up on a farm with 3 donkeys, Bruno, Toby and Willow, and I honestly can't imagine life without them. However, both of my parents had barely touched a horse, let alone ridden one, before they adopted the donkeys. So I actually spent years asking my parents for lessons before I was finally allowed. As soon as I could walk, I would try and help my parents look after the donkeys. The first time I ever actually sat on a horse was at a friend's birthday party, as my parents always told me I was too young or too small to learn to ride. At the age of 5, I started having riding lessons at our local stables down the road. On a Saturday morning, I started off just being led around the woods. However, after a year, I started to have lessons in the sand school and was gradually taken off the lead rein, and eventually learned how to canter and jump. This grey here is called Joey, and he was definitely one of my favourites. When I was 7, I had my first lone pony called Bradley. In return for keeping him on our field, I got to ride him for free. However, in the summer his owners used to ride him a lot, so I started loaning Lola. She was a little Welsh Section A pony, and on her I managed to do my first couple of shows. And these photos were taken when I just turned 8. We mainly did a lot of showing together. However, as she was quite young, she was still a little bit spooky. At the end of the summer, we unfortunately had to stop loaning her as she went lame with laminitis. And at the end of 2009, Bradley's owners ended up moving yards and selling him, so I was ponyless. Enter Mickey, a 10-year-old 13-hand Cremello gelding. After 1 month of loaning him, my parents decided to buy him, and I still have this little guy today. He might not have been worth much, but to me he was the perfect first pony. He was never spooky in traffic and always loves going on hacks or trail rides. After a year of owning Mickey, I started to have lessons with my instructor that I still have today. And in 2011, we did our first ever pony club camp together. We had loads of fun and learnt so much, which is also great for my parents being non-equestrians, as they got to learn loads of things along the way. Unfortunately, in the winter we could only really ride on the road as the fields were too muddy. However, I did manage to continue having lessons with my riding instructor in her sand school, so we were still able to canter and jump. The next summer, Mickey and I did our first ever show together, and surprisingly came home with a trophy and a couple of rosettes. In the summer of 2012, we did our second junior camp together, and had an amazing week as well. We might have fallen off a couple of times. Mickey might not have been built for show jumping, however he always tried his hardest, especially when we did our first cross country together. However, at my second camp, I found Mickey's passion for mounted games. He was never spooky with any of the equipment, and he might have not been the fastest, however slow and steady wins the race. In the winter we started training after school with our Pony Club's mounted games team, as well as doing lots of hacking together, and continuing to have lessons every Saturday with my instructor. In the summer of 2013, I started doing a lot more show jumping at home with Mickey, as we made some jumps out of old tyres and logs, and it definitely became one of my favourite disciplines. Mickey might not have been the easiest with bucking a lot, however he is definitely the funniest horse I've ever met and has a great personality. In 2013 we did our third and final camp together. Unfortunately, I started to outgrow him and became a little bit too big for him, so at the end of the summer my parents and my instructor told me that I had to start to look for a new horse. This actually really upset me, as I loved Mickey so much and I couldn't imagine life without him. However, 60 centimetres was his max and I knew I had to get something bigger. I had the choice of selling Mickey and getting a horse that was well trained. However, I loved Mickey so much I couldn't part with him. Luckily I was able to keep him, however our budget for a new horse was a lot smaller. So while we were on our hunt for a new horse, I continued to practice mounted games with Mickey and even competed for our pony club. It took us over half a year to find a new horse, as they were either out of our price range or had some sort of health condition. So in the end we bought Casper, a 15-hand 7-year-old grey Connemara gelding. He was actually born in Ireland and moved to England a year before we got him. As he was young, he was quite green, as he had barely really been ridden that much and had only previously hunted in Ireland. So he had never competed and never been to any shows before ever. Here are some clips of when Casper first met Mickey. However, I think he was a little bit more interested to see what the donkeys were, as he'd never seen donkeys before. Our first ride had to be on the road as the fields were too muddy and Casper wouldn't even walk past a stationary parked car, so that was eventful. Mickey and Casper Casper quickly became best friends, and the fields then was so horrible and muddy I could barely ride him, and it was even worse because at the beginning of 2014 the UK had major flooding. In my first lesson with my instructor, Casper bucked me off twice, then she got on and he bucked her off once, and then we had to lunge him for the rest of the lesson. Looking back at these clips, I'd forgotten how skinny Casper was and how little muscle he had, and it makes me upset to think that he was even skinnier when he first came over from Ireland. However, we put him on a top-line conditioning mix and started doing lots of pole work to help build up his muscles. My instructor taught me how to lunge Casper, and we had to do this every single time before I rode him because he used to be so strong for me and I literally would just fall off him all the time. Casper was very unbalanced as he had very little muscle, so on canter right he used to always be disunited. See, Casper managed to get the right canter lead, however he could only get this when we went over a jump. And also, what is my position in this? I was literally trying to hang on for dear life. After a month or two of owning Casper, we took him to his first ever outing, a pony club show jumping clinic. I remember I had to approach all the jumps in trot, as if not he would get too excited in canter and would just bolt off with me, as he found going to a new place for the first time very, very exciting. When we first got him, he was a very, very nervous horse, so I think all of the spooking he did because he was actually terrified rather than him being naughty. As the months went on, Casper continued to gain weight and muscle, which was excellent, and we definitely started to progress. In 2014, we did our first ever camp together, which was also my last junior camp, as I was old enough to go to senior camp. However, as I hadn't had Casper long, we thought it would be more sensible to do one last year of junior camp, and in that week I really got to know him and we had so much fun. However, my first year of owning Casper wasn't easy at all. He used to buck, spook and bolt with me all the time. And at the beginning of 2015, my parents had to sit me down and talk to me about getting a new horse and getting rid of Casper as they couldn't keep seeing me get hurt. But selling Casper was the last thing I wanted to do. Instead, I persevered and kept going. I didn't want him to think I'd given up on him. So instead of buying a new horse, we put the money towards building an arena. This meant I could ride him a lot more often, rather than just a few weeks in the summer when the ground was dry, or every now and again when I could with my instructor. Keeping Casper was definitely one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life, as I don't know where he would have ended up if I'd given up on him, as I love him so much. Every bolt I would ride through it, and every buck I would sit, as I was never going to let you go. And over our second year together, we managed to jump fences I never thought was possible. We continued to progress more and more each day, and I honestly can't thank you enough for making me the rider I am. We did our first ever senior camp together, and we might not have been perfect, but we were a lot better than I ever thought we would be. We started to go to a lot more outings together, including cross-country training with the pony club, and each time we improved more and more. In the summer of 2015, we did our first ever competition together. We might have just done the 60 centimetre show jumping class. We might not have gone clear, but to me it was a massive achievement. At the end of 2015, we did our first ever pony club show jumping competition. Although Casper bucked me off twice in the warm-up, we managed to come home with second and third place in the 70 and 80 centimetres, and that was definitely the proudest moment of my life, as people could see that Casper wasn't the same horse that he was when we first bought him. My third year of owning Casper in 2016 was a great year. We became a lot more confident with jumping larger courses and did a lot more cross-country practice as well, which Casper really enjoyed. And we also got to compete a lot more together. At the beginning of 2016, I started to regularly post videos up to YouTube, even if they were just little video edits filmed on an iPhone. The videos might have not been the best of quality, but to me it was a great way of tracking our progress and looking back on memories. At the end of 2016, I started doing more requested videos such as vlogs or tutorials, and from then on, my channel has started to grow. In 2016, I also started to work really hard on Casper's flat work, and we finally managed to get canter right, but Casper is no longer disunited in canter. As he has a lot more muscle now, we're able to work him in a much nicer frame. In 2016, we also did our first ever dressage test and scored over 60%. However, there are still things that we need to work on. In 2016, we did our third camp together and had a great time, especially on the cross-country course, which Casper loved. I even got to represent my pony club at Hicksted on Casper, which is one of the UK's most well-known show jumping circuits. We might not have placed, but it was still an absolutely incredible experience. For our 4th year together in 2017, we might not have competed much as I've had my GCSE exams, as well as living on a building site and moving into our new house opposite the horses in October. So unfortunately we didn't have enough time to take up a whole day to go to a competition. Still managed to go to a clear round and jump our first ever 3-foot course, as well as jumping BE 100 fences at camp. We are now jumping courses a metre high, and I honestly can't believe that you're the same horse I brought home when I was only 12 years old, and now I'm almost 17. I can't wait to see our progress over 2018 together if we decide to do eventing or show jumping. Hopefully we'll be able to compete more together this year, however with A-levels on the horizon it might be a bit more difficult. And not even 1,000 rosettes will make me as proud as I am today of how far that we've come together. So thank you Casper for making me who I am today. And thank you Mickey for giving me confidence when I most needed it. Seeing how far Mickey and I had come together really made me see the light at the end of the tunnel with Casper. When I got Casper, I started to do a lot more tactless riding with Mickey, and I'd honestly trust Mickey with my life, as he is the most chilled out, bomb-proof pony ever. Although I don't ride him as often with his age and respiratory problem, however he really enjoys doing a bit of tactless riding or going on hacks or trail rides every now and again. And as soon as I found out about bitless riding from YouTube, we've been bitless together ever since. Maybe one day I'll say the same for Casper, but while we're still competing, he'll be staying in his snaffle. To this day, I've never sold a horse, and I'm so grateful to have both of these boys in my life. I don't know what the future will bring, but I'm excited for it nonetheless. So that's my riding story so far, and thank you for joining the journey along the way, and I can't wait to see where it takes us.